So I got to go away. I was on vacation for about a week with my family. This was something that we were looking forward to. Last year, my parents celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, and so my 5 sisters and 2 brothers and about 40 grandchildren-ish, we all went off to Montana. And one of the things about Montana, it's called Big Sky. And the reason why it's Big Sky is because these mountains are glorious, and then there's these blue sky that just kind of wraps it all together. But things going on in Montana are bears, so you have to be careful of bears. And the key thing about the bears is not necessarily have bear spray or bells or anything. If you confront a bear, the key thing is to outrun your brother or sister. That's the best bear repellent around. Because they always say when they look at bear scat, they always find bells and bear spray in there, so that doesn't seem to be the best. That's probably not a very charitable way to think about. Anyway, we did these great hikes, and it was just fantastic. You go to these mountains and lakes, and you're catching trout. And one of these mountains had some snow on it, and so all the kids thought, this is great. We can sled ride in 90-degree weather. And so there they went down on their little bumpers and their shorts and just started sled riding down there. One guy who was a show-off, not in my family, he actually brought skis and ski boots, hiked up to this really high mountain, and skied down part of the mountain where there was this snow cutout. One of my nephews, he was showing me what him and his brother were doing at one of these lakes out there. And they had rented a boat. And I'd never seen this before, but now I realize I'm probably the last person not to know that this happened. See, I used to do water skiing, so you always had a rope. You held onto the rope, and you could get up, and I could slalom and do that. Anyway, he was showing me what they were doing, which was they could get the boat to go at such a pace, he would have a surfboard and a rope. Then he would go right inside the wave, just a couple of feet behind the boat, let go of the rope, and surf behind the boat without a rope. I thought he was Jesus walking on the water. And there he was just cruising along. My man Seamus, he's a freshman at the University of Denver. And I'm like, how did he do this? I didn't know anybody else could. It's just like a miracle. Anyway, it's really cool. And as long as he stayed in the wave, he was fine. When you're in that wave right behind the boat, you don't need to hold on to rope. You're good to go. But if you fade back a little bit, boom, kerplunk. You know, when you look in the readings today, there seems to be a theme that's woven through the whole entire thing. And that is, come to the water. Jesus went into a boat. Paul talks about this tremendous power, the most powerful thing, which is God's love. If we stay in the wave of God's grace, we can come to that water. We can experience that power. And we're in with that boat, in that life, in our church. Then we can look at our world and say, okay, yeah, there are all these challenges out there, but the most important thing is to stay in the wave. Many times in our society, it's all about, okay, what activities do we need to do? We need to go do this. We need these top things done, and we need to go change this. If only we got the elections to do this, and then we got enough money to do this, or if we could graduate to do this, and all these activities. But what God is saying, and what our biblical religion teaches us, is not about human activity that counts. The primacy goes to receptivity of God. There's nothing more fruitful, there's nothing more important than to stay in the wave of God's grace, to receive God's love, to do what all of you are about to do today, which is to receive Holy Communion, to hear His Word. Receptivity, biblically speaking, is so much more important and takes primacy over activity. But that's the challenge. We look in our culture today and it's, okay, I just need this from Amazon and then I'll be happy, or I just need to go get this food and then I'll be happy. If I only had these books, or if I only had this movie, or if only I could watch this, or only if the Penguins would beat the Montreal Canadiens, then I would be happy. And no, it's how can I stay in the wave of God's grace? And for me, before I went on vacation, were some of the hardest days of my priesthood, having to make these decisions about how to manage our church during this time and our employee situation. We usually average well over 3,000 people coming to Mass in our great grouping. and we're around 1,400, which is good. But you look and you say we can only manage so many people with the percentages like this, and obviously in this Corona time, there's a lot of fear, and there's public schools are saying they're going to go online. I was just talking to somebody today. Her heart was set on going to Catholic University and to be on grounds there with her friends, and they just announced that school is going to be online. And so my heart goes out to all of us during this time where it's just it's hard to see when there's no end date. It's like, okay, we could do this if we knew, okay, this will end here. But we don't know the end date. One thing we do know is, at least 6 months ago, nobody talked about the Spanish flu. There will be an end date to this. We just don't know what it is. But what is so beautiful, when I came back from vacation, just started to look at how so many of you have responded, how so many prayers have come forth to support our church, how our staff has heroically stepped up to the plate. And so it's interesting when we stay in the wave of God's grace, the way in which the Lord can work miracles of looking at 5,000 families in our great grouping and be able to feed them with 5 fish or 5 loaves and 2 fish. And some examples of that, just in the last 2 weeks, we had 14 new families join the parish. As I said before, we're averaging about 1,400 people on weekly Mass. Just last Monday, when I got back from vacation, I can't think of a better gift that was gifted to me by our grouping to start Eucharistic adoration again in the Beaver Valley and Conway. So now we have our 2 access of adoration, a door at the door at St. John and Paul, and adoration from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. in Conway and Our Lady of Peace. And almost on a monthly basis, they're going out and fixing homes for our elderly who are homebound. We sent out a scouting mission, a reconnaissance mission to Kentucky to go out and start preparing our mission trips. Hopefully soon we'll be able to do these mission trips, especially with our families and college and high school students. I think if you counted all the faces and mouths that we got to feed over the last few months, there'd be well into the 6,000 and 7,000 of people we've been able to feed. Tuesday nights, if anybody's ever free, come down to Ambridge. There's amazing, these hot meals that we're preparing. The Padres, we're going to be cooking up something on August 15th, whatever day. I can't remember what day it is. Anyway, it's coming up on Tuesday. And all these things is just fantastic. I'd invite you guys to join us, or once a week we have boxes of dry good foods here for those who are in need in our community here. We just launched last night Faith Formation, and Jason Gualdo's out here in the narthex and told me in just the first time we just launched it yesterday, we have 100 families that have signed up for Faith Formation, and we're looking at these digital options for now, and hopefully in the future we're able to get back to where we were, but we're happy to at least be able to do that. And all the Padres have signed up too. Father Joe is going to work with the little ones. Father Jack is going to work with First Communion, First Confession. The bishop gave me the power and the authority to do confirmations this year, so I get to do confirmation class. And Father Mike's going to work with our high school students. Also, we're going to be welcoming some crews of homeschoolers into our community on Tuesdays. And we still have our frequent campfires with college and young adults, which has been a blast. And even last weekend, it was interesting to see the collections coming up. And we pray to God that we continue to serve. Bible studies are going to be revitalized soon, book clubs and all that type of stuff. And people are still having babies. So we're baptizing babies. We're doing all kinds of stuff to continue to be that lifeline. You know, like when my cousin started off behind the boat, he needed to hold on to a rope. And that's what the sacraments do. They get us into that wave of God's grace. And perhaps one thing that I'm super excited about is tonight at 6 p.m., we're going to relaunch our Latino ministry in Ambridge. We've had over 50 Latino families move into our great grouping, and they are so thirsting, as we hear in that first reading, to get their children baptized, their marriages validated, and to be able to receive communion again. If you've ever been to Latin America, one of the things you notice about it, or that struck me, is that when you see the churches and it's time for communion, maybe 50% actually go to communion. They have such a delicacy and a reverence towards the presence of God's grace of staying in the wave that they won't receive communion if they don't feel like they're worthy of it. And that community taught me so much for 7 years. I got to live in Mexico City, fall in love with Our Lady of Guadalupe. And so tonight, get to live out that dream in our new office that we're launching called Casa San Jose in Ambridge. But my point with all this is my cousin, or my nephew, Seamus, who's this college kid who could surf behind this boat, which I thought was like Jesus. I'm like, wow, this guy's, but here you can do this anywhere. But anyway, he was teaching his brother, Liam, how to do this as well. So the two of them are behind the boat on two separate little surfboards with ropes, and they start moving along. Now, mind you, they have another person who's actually got a drone filming all this. So it's like, wow, this is pretty impressive. Anyway, they're sitting there behind the boat. Both of them are going, and then they both let go of the rope. And they're both surfing behind a boat without a rope, but they're staying in the wave, so they're good to go. Now, the younger brother was being taught by the older brother. And eventually, as they start going, the older brother starts to tease. The younger brother starts, you better watch out. And you can see the younger brother like looking behind his back because the older brother was behind him. And so Liam's up there and Seamus is behind him. And so Seamus kind of shimmies up, gets almost right next to his brother and like scares him. And so Liam starts looking back and he starts to get terrified. And when you're not staying in the wave, do you know what happens? You start to fade back. And Liam started to fade back, and Seamus kind of shimmied up, and then Seamus did what all brothers would do. He pushed him. It went right down and just got right into the wave and got. So that's what can happen to us too. The key to our what Jesus and what I think God's trying to tell us is to stay in the wave of God's grace. When you're in that wave, it's amazing the miracles that God can work through us, the way in which we can allow our lives to flourish even in a pandemic, even if we're not allowed to go to school, even if we're having marriage issues, even if we're mourning the loss of somebody, because there's nothing more powerful. Nothing can separate us from the most powerful thing, as St. Paul says, which is that love of God, that wave of God's grace. And so let us today make sure that we're always connected. If we need to get back into that rope and get back into it, that's what the sacraments are for. And that great wave of God's grace has everything to do with us adoring and accepting, receiving God's love for us. And then when we're in that wave, it's amazing the things that we can do, as we hear in our parish, and in so many ways in which all of us can be these great disciples of Jesus Christ. Let's stand for the creed.